Awesome. All right, so my name's Jason Murphy, and this is Rebel Dharma, a weekly meditation group here in Los Angeles, Venice, California. And tonight we are beginning a therapeutic mindfulness masterclass. And I call it a masterclass not just because it's a buzzword, but actually I am a master's level therapist, and I am also a professor of psychology at Antioch University. So I teach master's level psychology. So this is a culmination of many years of work, and those of you who come here often know that I'm always talking about Buddhism and psychology and just kind of finding ways to blend it together. And I can't exactly remember. I think last week or something, I just decided that well, I'm just going to do more of a little bit of an academic presentation. And hopefully that will be helpful. One of the aspects of this that I wanted to kind of present is, that we're going to hold questions off till the end, where normally I would maybe open up. And I'm actually not super sure how that's going to go. But anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know that. So yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. Those of you who are new, welcome both in the room and on Zoom. And just maybe kind of a show of hands, like anyone that's going to newer to meditation. And what about online? You can raise the hand by, in the reactions if you're new to meditation. Great, most of you have been here before. All right, wonderful. So I'm going to, actually, I think I'll just start the presentation and then we will move into some meditation practices after that. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. All right. So this is called Therapeutic Mindfulness, and I wanted to just talk a little bit about, I'll be talking about how mindfulness is both from a Buddhist perspective and more of a secular mindfulness perspective, and how it's come to be in this way. And then we'll be getting, kind of into some of the nuts and bolts of mindfulness from a Buddhist psychological lens. So we'll focus on that. Yeah, let's go ahead and start with some practice. Mindfulness starts here, right? So finding a posture that's workable, that's sustainable, one where you can feel relaxed and alert. There's some cushions available for you, either against the wall or, yeah. And so it's a good idea to allow the eyes to close. It's not necessary to close the eyes, but it is suggested in this tradition to turn the attention inward. And just taking a moment and arriving here. Oftentimes, the body will arrive at a place long before the mind. So we're just encouraging the mind to inhabit the body and then opening up to the comings and goings of sound. Sounds outside the room, sounds inside the room. So if you can, allowing thoughts and sounds to just be in the background of one's attention as we aim the attention a little more specifically on this experience of breathing, allowing the breath to be an anchor. So aiming the attention towards this experience of breathing, connecting to wherever is the easiest place to rest the attention. Could be the tip of the nose, could be the rise and fall of the belly, could be the chest or the shoulders, wherever along the experience of breathing. And then sustain that attention once you kind of locate a space or a spot. Just breathing in, know that you're breathing in. Breathing out, know that you're breathing out. Of course, the attention will wander off. It's not a problem. It's just what minds do. Think, plan, remember. Mindfulness is the moment that we recognize that the attention has wandered off, and then just return to the instruction: aim, connect, sustain. Aiming the attention back with a sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, connecting to the experience of breathing, and then sustaining that connection for as long as possible. Again and again, recognizing when the attention wanders off with a sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind. is aiming the attention back. Aim, connect, sustain. Again and again. Each breath arises, stays for a time, passes away. Each thought, sensation, any of the senses follow this trajectory of impermanence, arising, staying for a time, passing away, observing the breath in this way, beginning, middle, end, beginning again, recognizing when the attention wanders off, and with that sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, acknowledging where the attention has gone, and aiming the attention back. once mindfulness has been established, some collecting of attention, you can begin to broaden the awareness from just the breath to really allowing all experiences, thoughts, feelings, sensations. So the instruction would shift to relax, relaxing into the present time experience, observing through the sense doors, sounds and thoughts and sensations, emotions. We observe in kind of a allowing way where we're a bit detached. We're not getting involved in the sounds or the thoughts or the feelings, just knowing they're there and allowing them to arise, stay for a time, and pass away. Relax, observe, allow. Relaxing into each new breath, observing what arises in the heart and the mind, allowing whatever arises to stay for a time and pass away, as all things do. In traditional Buddhist teachings, the teacher, like myself, would give a Dharma talk. And before the Dharma talk, there is a period of sitting, like we just did. And my kind of interpretation and understanding of this is, we're so busy throughout our days, we're doing so many things, and that the Dharma, or the truth or the understanding of the mind, can be hard to comprehend, and particularly if we have a restless and agitated mind. So the kind of establishment of some mindful attention can allow for that shift from the doing of our day to the being, and perhaps even allowing the mind, in my view, to be more receptive to hearing whatever's presented, no, from a Buddhist psychological perspective, the Dharma. Right? Yeah. So I'm just going to kind of move through some of these slides now, and I will open up for some questions, but I want to just go over that there are limitations of the research, and there is potential risks for just teaching mindfulness or meditation to kind of anybody or any group. And it's important to be sensitive to trauma, sensitivity, understanding of whether it's applicable for all people. Now, in my early training, well, from the Buddhist perspective, actually, the Dharma or mindfulness is all helpful, right? Of course, the Southeast Asian or Asian kind of view is really that the Dharma is kind of pure and gold, and a course of healing for the mind, which is, not untrue. Yet, as it's landed and become popularized here in the States, there's different interpretations, and our minds are different in some ways, unique in some ways, psychologically, which has to do with causes and conditions. Now, when I was training, both in formal kind of mindfulness training and in Buddhist psychology, I had some internships, and I worked in some areas like working with kind of severe and persistent mental illness. This means kind of people with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorders or extreme bipolar, and other various severe and persistent mental illnesses, many of which there was all these kind of warnings of like, don't do meditation with these people. And even some of my supervisors, like the severely psychotic, they'll ruminate more, they'll lose their mind even more, and I challenged that, actually. I focused my my final kind of project, a culminating project, on doing research around following both psychotic and a borderline, and then also a borderline, so a psychotic client that had schizophrenia, was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and then someone that also suffered from borderline personality disorder, and had some bipolar tendencies, and really kind of monitored how the implication of mindfulness and meditation either supported their health and well-being or didn't, right? Was counterproductive. And not much of a surprise to me, it was, as the Asian masters say, all helpful. Now, it had to do with the presentation. Like the meditation that I just did with you all, I wouldn't necessarily, and I didn't, give to, say, a psychotic patient. there's way too much um, room for interpretation and kind of loose understanding or misunderstanding. So a lot of my focus in working with those populations I was talking about was really body centered, kind of body scans, or like some of you are doing walking meditation, doing eating meditation, um, loving kindness, compassion meditation. So there, even though there are limits and there are potential risks, um, there's also ways in which, if you have a trauma sensitive or a kind of mental health kind of awareness, can be, quite useful. And I have found that to be true. So I just wanted to, say that much. So my theoretical kind of background comes from a kind of neo-Freudian, well, and what I'm going to be bringing in comes from a neo-Freudian kind of psychoanalytic perspective. I also come from a Rogerian kind of positive psychology perspective, and then formally trained. Well, actually, not formally trained, but studied extensively in dialectical behavioral therapy, which I mean, as Marcia is the first to admit, is a way of borrowing very heavily from Buddhist principles and then finding a way to interpret that in a more useful frame for some. Then also studying mindfulness-based stress reduction and becoming a trainer in mindfulness-based stress reduction, and then also at UCLA at the Mark Institute with Daniel Siegel and others, the Mindful Awareness Research Center. So all of these are all kind of the orientation to more of a clinical approach to mindfulness or meditation. Now, also, I have studied for 25 years the suttas and mostly Theravada Buddhism, but also some Vajrayana Buddhism. And I was also a monk twice. I ordained temporarily in both Thailand and in Burma to really enrich my own understanding and experience. So that's kind of the orientation that I'm going to be coming from. And then my hope is to cover, and mostly today, I'm going to be focusing on kind of defining and understanding kind of mindfulness. And this masterclass may take on like a kind of compare and contrast, kind of neo-Freudian, Buddhist exploration as well. It's something I've been kind of dipping back into a bit. And who knows where else it'll go, right? It's kind of an open forum at this point, but this is what I'd like to focus on now. So the fundamentals of mindfulness, introduction to mindfulness concepts, some of the benefits of meditation through the at least 2 decades now of research. I'll introduce some of the DBT concepts, and we'll talk about some practical application of mindfulness techniques and exercises. So things that you may already be doing, things that you may want to incorporate into your life. So then some of the other, like bringing in some of the other aspects of mindfulness and how mindfulness changes the brain. So bringing in some of the kind of neuroscience that also has been pretty heavily researched at this point, which I think has really just legitimized a 2,560-year-old practice of healing the mind. That's what Buddhism really has pointed to. I often talk about Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, being the first psychoanalyst or the first psychiatrist, because he was in our history, he was really the first that I know of that was really interested in the wounds of the mind and then healing those wounds, and how to do that, and very methodically, kind of specifically, and how do we do that, some of which we're going to go over today. Then we'll be talking about ethical mindfulness, or sometimes it's called ethical integrity, and how that helps to heal the wounds of the mind. Compassion fatigue, we'll touch on a bit, and kind awareness, positive regard, the kind of Rogerian Buddhist approach to doing what we often call the heart practices and kind of healing, which I found to be extremely helpful, particularly with people who have trauma or a lot of kind of negative self-talk. So practical tools and implementing mindfulness, and then this kind of everyday mindfulness, right? So one of the other ways I like to talk about this is emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and neuroscience, kind of where they converge, right? Where they come together. So what is mindfulness? You know, there's a lot of different kind of thoughts about it. There's a lot of different kind of interpretations about it. So the practice of mindfulness is outlined in kind of the oldest school of Buddhism, basically known as Theravadan Buddhism. Theravadan means the narrow path, and the other side of Buddhist teaching is known as Mahayana Buddhism. Mahayana is known as the greater path, and the way that this was, or the small vehicle and the large vehicle. Sometimes it's just talked about as like regions, right? There's the northern region and the southern region of the way that Buddhism kind of migrated and split. But so the group of teachings is called the Pali Canon. So the Pali Canon is the suttas, of which all other forms of Buddhist literature have grown out of. So mindfulness is outlined in detail within the teachings entitled the Satipatthana Sutta, which, you know, described as the direct path to realization. So in the, you know, late 1800s, a British scholar, a lot of the original translations of the Pali Canon, or the language of Pali, was started with British scholars, and most of which didn't really understand anything about Buddhism, and they would just, you know, they were just looking at the language. And Pali is like Latin in the sense that it's kind of a dead language. In other words, it wasn't written down, it was spoken, it was vernacular, and it was passed down. The teachings were passed down. And then finally written down several hundred years after the Buddha died. But the first kind of translations, particularly of mindfulness, was around the, you know, late 1800s. And, you know, if we break down the roots of, or I guess the etymology of mindfulness, you know, we'll find that there's two very important, particularly the Satipatthana Sutta, there's two very important kind of points here. Sati is the translation of the word mindfulness, right? So that's the kind of the root, the ability to remember, to cognize, to recognize, or what I like to call recognize. And so when I was giving you guys instructions during the meditation, the instruction was to recognize when the attention wanders off. And then I add a little loving kindness in there, with a sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind. This is to help reduce the judgment and criticism that is pretty pervasive in our culture. And so that moment of recognition, and then recognizing, oh, the attention has wandered off, and then not having a judgment about it, but just that's mindfulness right in that moment. That is the moment of mindfulness. Mindful awareness is when we recognize that the attention has wandered off, and then placing the attention back is actually, that's the tana, a ground or a foundation, or grounding back into our physical experience, or into the more of the concentrated effort, right? So this is just another way of talking a little bit more about these aspects, right? So I also, I feel like emotional intelligence, which has become more popular, or there's been a resurgence, I guess you could say, because really in the 80s is when emotional intelligence, EQ, became popular, and it was for a little while, and then it faded out of popularity. But now it's resurging, and there was a resurgence around social and emotional learning that started in a kind of early education and whatnot. But anyway, I feel like really mindfulness and meditation is also heavily connected to this idea of emotional intelligence. So the ability to recognize the emotion that you are feeling, experiencing, as you are feeling or experiencing it, being able to kind of choose how you respond when you have become emotional. So this is a very practical tool that's found within psychology today. Many of the solution-focused psychological kind of orientations, ACT, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, stuff like that. So in practical terms, this means kind of being aware that emotions will typically drive our behavior and impact other people, either constructively or destructively, right? So learning how to manage those emotions, both our own and others. In other words, the way that we receive other people's emotions. Especially when we're under kind of pressure, stress, or confrontation. So this is one of the kind of main aspects of this concept of emotional intelligence and how it folds into the mindfulness practices. So now let's look at the four foundations of mindfulness, right? So the four foundations of mindfulness are, and I talk about this all the time. This is something that, I'm constantly coming back to. Our orientation here is one of using the four foundations of mindfulness as a core tenet. So there's the objects of attention, and then there's the outcomes, or what we're kind of focusing on, right? So the objects being body, breath, the first foundation of mindfulness. This is what I was guiding us towards today. We're using the body and breath to stay, well, to be grounded, to gain some foundation of awareness. And then what's the outcome is we become more aware of the sensations, right? We gain an insight of actually how much we are affected by our world and even our thoughts. And there's often this disconnect between people going numb, like feeling numb, or being very rational or intellectual, and not connecting to the body. And so I think in the Buddha's wisdom, he was like, okay, we got to start here, get people grounded, right? And any of the kind of newer, more contemporary psychological practices are incorporating this, right? So gaining in sensation awareness. And then the next is feelings. So feelings from a Buddhist perspective is very simple. It really just means pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Like there's really only, from the Buddhist perspective, there's only three things that are happening within our feeling or emotional sphere, and that is that which is pleasant, that which is unpleasant, and that which is neutral. Now we can give more language to what those three baskets would entail, right? And we've done that. This is where there's feeling wheels and feeling faces and helping people to identify. But from the Buddhist perspective, not getting into the story of it, but instead just experiencing the raw, this is what I'm experiencing. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Ear, sound, hearing, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. That's it. Then there's the mental state. So this also moves into from the body or breath to the feelings, then to the mental states. There's what we call attitudes or emotions, right? So the attitudes are kind of the temperament that we might experience in our day-to-day life and our relationship to the thoughts and emotions. Um, and then that gives rise, or another area of focus is mental objects, right? The activities of the mind or the thinking process. And so, uh, what I think is just so wise about this is how often are we just in the activities and the thinking aspect? This is what I'm saying. Like we start from even what I started with in the very beginning, like let's allow the mind to inhabit the body, you know. And very often, I think, particularly in Western culture, where we're very much into activities and thinking, and that leads most of what's happening in our experience. And from the Buddhist perspective, we need to be able to incorporate all of these in order to lead to the path of realization, right? That's the kind of the idea. So, and what, what is realization, right? So of course, I won't spend too much time on this, but there's been lots of writing, and scientists have studied it, doctors recommend it, millions of Americans, many of whom don't even own crystals, practice it every day. Why? Because meditation works. And there was several articles in Time Magazine, Psychology Today. And there's now a whole new, kind of mindful magazine and whatnot. So this has become more and more popularized, which I think is a very good thing because it leads people to um, seeing the the benefits of mindfulness and meditation. And I remember when this Time magazine article came out, I think it was like 2001 or 2002. And I mean, I don't feel represented by that particular image, but I do feel like it did a lot to um, open the door to the legitimacy of mindfulness and meditation, that it wasn't just woo woo, right? So one of my friends, his name's Dave Smith. He wrote a book called Ethical Mindfulness, and he's also a Dharma teacher. And I like this quote. He came up with this kind of there's some very popular kind of definitions of mindfulness, being this kind of awareness of what's happening within you and around you, or non-judgmental present time awareness. But I really just like this one. Mindfulness is the ability to objectively monitor the arising and passing of thoughts, sensations, and emotions within the contextual framework of present time experience. So this, again, this kind of, can we be aware of what's happening within us and around us? And as I've said to you before, what does mindfulness or meditation help us to do but reveal the stark reality of our everyday mind? That happened to some degree here. And then we also can learn to shift that stark reality. We can begin to see it, and then we can also begin to non-identify. And this is one of the things that is happening here in our practice. So just another way of kind of looking at mindfulness, right? In the moment, awareness, acceptance, non-judgmental, all of these pieces are what we call mindfulness. So I want to talk a little bit about the connection between what's happened with modern psychology and what we're calling Dhamma or Buddhist psychology, and then the places where they have intersected, right? So Buddhism, Buddhist psychology, in the most original kind of form, probably 500 years after the Buddha died, there was a kind of creation of, well, there's the Visuddhimagga, which is a kind of a more systemized teaching that is popularized today. Almost everyone uh, whether they know it or not, are actually teaching and understanding Buddhism from this Visuddhimagga lens. And then there's a component of that known as the Abhidhamma. Abhidhamma really is this understanding of the mind. It's kind of like science of mind or mind training. And so that's the kind of Buddhist psychological perspective. And then the way that it's become popularized is that there was a secularization, particularly here in the West, of mindfulness. And this is what we call mindfulness-based stress reduction or mindfulness-based CBT. So this bringing in some of the already established cognitive behavioral approaches and then applying mindfulness to it and removing some of the what might have seemed, I mean, I feel like Buddhism really is not very dogmatic, but removing things like the ethical principles uh, from mindfulness or from Buddhism, and removing things like heart practices or compassion practices because they seemed too woo-woo, and really just focusing on honing in on what is mindfulness, and then uh, secularizing that so that it can reach a larger audience. And it's been, very useful and successful in that way. And I think allowed it to morph into, lots of different Western psychological models. So this blending of Western psychological models, whether it be cognitive behavioral therapy or kind of psychoanalytic or even some, Jungian. There's many different kind of Rogerian, like I was saying, this kind of positive psychology, self-psychology. So it's kind of been filtering together and I think some pretty interesting ways. So yeah, I just like to kind of show that there's it's all here, it's all related. And what we primarily focus on here is Buddhism, is Theravadan Buddhist practice, right? Because and I think that some of my teachers, my Western teachers, have come to this point also of recognizing that the ethical principles found within Buddhism are super helpful and are a key component. Like the Buddha wouldn't have taught it if it wasn't, useful, right? And then also what we call the heart practices or the Brahma Viharas, this really doing the emotional work of healing. Is I think two vital components that have been watered down or whitewashed from from traditional Buddhist teachings. Now, there is also, I think, useful to say, there's also many aspects of Buddhism here in the West and in other parts of the world that have a lot of cultural overlay. Because there's this description that I was given once that Buddhism is like tofu. It mixes well with anything it's cooked with, right? So, tofu by itself kind of bland, but you throw a little soy sauce or a little ginger, and then all of a sudden it has a lot of different flavors, right? And so Buddhism is really like that in some way, that it blends with the culture that it moves into. We found this true with all the different places, right? From different aspects of India, Tibet, Japan, Korea, China, Southeast Asia, and here, and Europe as well, where it's kind of found its voice or its kind of expression. And then both fortunately and unfortunately, that means that there's been certain aspects of the traditional teachings that had been kind of separated out. But the positive about that, and I think, I remember His Holiness the Dalai Lama, like he was asked, like, what is your religion? And he said, my religion is kindness. That's what's the core tenets of Buddhism. but kindness, compassion, seeing clearly, and being of service. This is the kind of core tenets of Buddhism. And so there is, some kind of re-engagement in like what I talk about here, which is bringing in more Buddhist psychology and not necessarily kind of separating it out as this is mindfulness and it's applicable to lots of different people. But I do think that secular or MBSR or secular mindfulness has a place, particularly if people are resistant to any discussion or understanding of religion, right? They get their hackles up around anything religious. Oh, this is too religious. Even me sitting cross-legged and, or bowing, or, it's like, oh, it's too religious for me. And that's going to happen. Yeah. And that's okay. And there is secular mindfulness approaches for that purpose. All right, so some of the psychological benefits of meditation. This is, kind of, I've gleaned several, these next couple slides are just several points that I've understood and researched over the years. One being that, meditation can assist in many areas that are related to your state of mind, such as increasing your intelligence, improving your memory, enhancing your creativity, drastically improving your ability to think clearly. All of these aspects have been proven through a lot of it through actually the secular mindfulness approach, right? Because that was instituted a lot in hospitals by like John Kabat-Zinn and whatnot. So there's this this list of the kind of before and after, like after an 8-week course of pretty rigorous, or even I've participated in some research out of Berkeley, out of UC Berkeley, where they would like start in the beginning. They would do some kind of an online questionnaire and like test around emotional attunement, and then in the beginning of a retreat, and then 30 days later at the end of a 30-day meditation retreat, they would do the same test again. And obviously there was, people were much more attuned, to themselves and to the rest of the world after 30 days of doing meditation for 20 hours a day. But that's this is just some of the psychological benefits, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's many physical benefits as well. A lot of this has really been brought out by again the medical research in stress reduction, reduced muscular tension, strengthening the immune system, accelerating ability to recover from strenuous exercise, decrease of high blood pressure, lowering cholesterol, all of these different pieces, reducing levels of stress hormones such as cortisol, increased feelings of vitality and rejuvenation. All of these can be experienced by any one of us. Some of the emotional benefits often overlooked are, many benefits of meditation that relate to your emotional well-being. People who meditate not only experience a reduction in stress, but they also report emotional improvements such as, right, improved sense of positivity, increased confidence, greater ability to give and receive love, elimination of panic attacks, greater sense of warmth, openness, and openness towards others. So all this is a pitch to, I'm preaching to the choir here, but meditation is good for you. And the more you do it, the better it is. Back to this original teaching of the Buddha, mindfulness is all helpful. So this is, I think, just an interesting piece that I've found. They did some brain scans in the different aspects of how meditation affects the brain. And so you have kind of, well, really starting from the bottom to the top, you have this kind of gamma, which is understood to be linked to perception and alertness or anxiety, and then beta, which these are different frequencies of brain waves, which is conscious thought, external focus. This is the doing mind, like I was talking before. And then alpha, this is once, let's say 10 minutes of meditation perhaps has started, there's a spaciness or a dreamy state, receptive but passive. Sometimes this can actually be also connected to dissociation. So if someone is dissociative, they will find themselves in that alpha state more often. Or when they first start meditating, coming in, there's the busyness, there's the gamma or the beta active. And then after 10, 15 minutes or so, they might start to feel a little bit spacey, and then continuing to go. With this kind of practice of returning or remembering again and again, then they're dropping down into what's known as the theta waves. This is the kind of sweet spot, right? This kind of subconscious, creative, deep level of relaxation, where insight we begin to kind of, that's the seeing clearly, hence the kind of meditating before giving a talk or something like that, to allow for this receptivity to begin. And then longer than, it's said that most of the studies have been, it's somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes to get to that theta state. Now, obviously, if people are meditating regularly, then they might be able to connect into that quicker, and moving through the other levels. And also, will depend on the causes and conditions of the day. But then the delta waves is this deeper levels of insight that usually somewhere about 45 minutes to an hour can be connected to. This is what the study was pointing to. So yeah, I've always really liked this image, and how it kind of talks about just the different parts of the brain, and yeah. So I'm going to go through a couple more slides, and then I'll open up for some questions. Okay. So another aspect of this is often, we are unaware, and so there's kind of three aspects to this disconnection that can take place. So there's a lack of awareness. There's an unawareness of our bodies, feelings, thoughts, our surroundings. We can be spaced out or checked out throughout the day. Kind of like when you're driving home and you're, maybe listening to music, and you're not even really aware where you are, and then but you somehow get home, right? I mean, there's a procedural memory to that, but there's other aspects of it too. But often, yeah, we're unaware of what's happening. Mindfulness helps us to attune to these aspects of present time awareness, right? And disconnected, we often feel disconnected due to a lack of moment to moment awareness. We often feel disconnected to what's happening within us and around us. And, sometimes this is a defense mechanism. This is a little bit of that, kind of also the dissociative aspects. And so we might think, if I, don't give attention, then I don't have to see or feel that which is unpleasant. This is it's a little bit of a pleasure bias as well. Like we tend to want to seek pleasurable experiences and avoid unpleasant experiences, whether that's internally or externally. And then out of balance, right? So we do feel out of balance, and oftentimes we can't pinpoint why. So, oftentimes people aren't able to identify this feeling of out of balance, but it may come up in many ways. Mindfulness helps us to identify this, and here's some of the ways in which clients, folks, participants in mindfulness meditation groups, and this is primarily through the mindfulness-based stress reduction and the UCLA MARC groups. This is some of what people tend to experience as being out of balance. So there's muscle tension, irritability, smoking, eating, sleeping disturbances, emotional overwhelm, personal identity issues, feeling restlessness, headaches, worry, anxiety, fatigue, distress, stomach distress, a lot of IBS, the fatigue often kind of presenting as fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, difficulty in concentrating, which also some people call ADHD. Everyone just kind of labels, everyone's got ADHD now, right? And it might just be that there's some pervasive distraction going on, right? And that meditation and mindfulness can really help to hone that in. Substance abuse, depression, self-esteem issues, all when people come to me and they're wanting to seek out therapy, they're often complaining of many of these aspects. And of course, I don't just like go, well, you just need to meditate, and then everything will get better. But I actually believe that. I actually do believe that. I believe, and now that's not always the best presentation, but mindfulness, meditation, heart practices, concentration practices, living in an integrous way, and having a safe, supportive relationship where you can feel heard and seen, and someone that you can trust and feel safe with, of course. This is known as the therapeutic relationship, right? Also, it can be a teacher-student relationship as well. So, how do we get balance? Well, by gaining in awareness. And then after gaining in awareness, we feel naturally more connected. And when we start to feel more connected to what's happening within us and around us, then there is a natural sense of balance that arises. And so this awareness, connection, and balance is one of the main aspects of mindfulness practice. Yeah. Let me see where we're at here. So it's all about balance. Yeah, I think this might be a good place to just to pause and see if there's any questions, any things that are coming up, any things you'd like any kind of clarity on that is within your. So if you have any questions, those of you online, feel free to raise your hand in the reactions and or in the room. You like a little more clarity on. This is the first of a series. Things you related to. Yeah.
The stuff about emotions, there's an awareness of them, and we see them come, and it was the thing about objective.
Objective monitoring.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So where does expressing emotions fit into that?
Well, so what we're talking about, and this is something that you're interested in, right? Because we've talked about it a lot, and I'm glad that you brought it up. What we're really talking about is how does mindfulness interact with these different aspects, right? This is what's laid out in the Satipatthana Sutta. So one aspect is, let's say someone is overwhelmed emotionally, like they become very emotionally flooded, right? Then the mindfulness and the observation to gain some space from that feeling of being overwhelmed would be really useful. Now, if someone is, say, detached or disconnected from their emotion, and maybe they're kind of stuffing or repressing or avoiding, right? Then it would actually be more of that investigation piece that we were talking about kind of last week, which is actually there's more to be broken down around all of these different terms. We just don't have a lot of time to do it today, but I'll start to get into that next week. So it's skillful means. It's finding, okay, like when is it useful to just see, okay, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and allowing some of that calm, some of that reconnecting to the body and breath, to disengage from being emotionally overwhelmed or flooded, versus when is it skillful because there's maybe been some defense mechanisms that have come up that, like, in order to, like, I don't feel safe in the world, and so in order for me to feel safe, I have to shut down this part of myself, or barrier or boundary, this part of myself, which is also very common. That's why I think a lot of people go into the intellectualizing, rationalizing. A lot of people in the educational, like in the academia, or even I've noticed in software kind of engineers and these kind of folks really excel in these particular areas, but maybe are kind of shut down in some other areas around emotion. Maybe could have something to do with childhood, maybe not, maybe a negative experience, but the skillful means is finding, and this is where it's useful to have a therapist that is knowledgeable, or a teacher that is knowledgeable on, okay, well, and or just your own knowledge of what you experience, how you experience things, and being able to then, someone, I would say, learning how to relate to it in as skillful a way as we talked about in the past. So during meditation, during mindfulness, meditation, there might be emotions that arise, and to kind of discern, okay, like, is it, do is this an appropriate time to just to allow myself to kind of feel what I'm feeling, you know, and and allow it to have full expression. I think oftentimes it's very useful to allow that to happen, particularly if you're one of the suppression types, right?
So what you're talking about is as a clinician,
Uh-huh.
right? And so if you're working with somebody
Mm.
in this way, do you have them meditate with you during a session?
Yeah.
And then as these things come up, that's when you do this.
Well, I mean, we I actually more have them meditate on their own, like, through, I have, several meditations on the Insight Timer app or things that are on YouTube, and so I have them kind of engage with mindfulness and meditation on their own, and then we will talk about it during session. But I always will, I don't always, but I will often bring in, at least 5-10 minutes of meditation in a session. Um, so yes, in that sense, I'm a mindfulness based psychotherapist. So a lot of what I do is focusing on just what I've been talking about here. And then, fine tuning, like, when is it skillful, when is it unskillful, and are, helping people to understand, like, okay, do I become emotionally dysregulated, right? Am I someone who becomes emotionally dysregulated? They're probably going to know. Everyone's probably said it to them. Or are you someone who is emotionally repressed, right? Which also they will probably you know come into practice kind of having, or come into therapy kind of having some knowledge of either one of those, right? And maybe there's both that is happening too. That's a whole nother. I'm not going to get into that so much today, but um, yeah, I think that's when it's useful to have someone to speak to about it, uh, and also just to know your tendency. Yeah, great question. Any other questions? All right. Well, we will end this portion for today, and we'll pick it up from here next week. And I'll start to think about putting in some, and I'm open to suggestions too. Feel free to email me or write in the chat if there's particular topics that you would like to have me focus on, or we can talk about those of you in the room. Um, but my hope is to break down a little bit more of the language that we use in meditation, attention, awareness, concentration, inquiry, insight, like these kinds of words, wisdom. Um, yeah, and then, yeah, we'll see. More will be revealed, right? So Thank you for your time and attention. Those of you online or in the room.